and welcome everyone to InvertiCast. And I am Leah, of course, you know me from Tarantula, and my co-host here, Nat from Somerset Spiders,
Hi.
and we have Bryan from Rubber Ducky Isopods.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys inviting me back for the second time. This is going to be, I feel like I'll have more polished answers for everybody, so I can offer a lot of education for the time today.
Oh, absolutely. And you haven't got the other added concentration of having to drive, which I think is
or my kids. They're not.
Yeah, or
they're
your
not
kids. So yeah, no, thank you for joining us again. Really looking forward to this. I know we've got a couple of people who follow the podcast who are really into isopods. So
Excellent. Yeah.
So yeah, it'd be really good to try and pick your brains about some stuff, especially maybe how it's done in the States.
Definitely.
But yeah, cool. Thank you for coming.
Again, thank you for inviting me. And, I think more education that's out there, the more people that understand that bioactive, when it's done correctly, means less work for you if you're doing isopods, if you're wanting to feed your reptiles, or if you simply just want to take care of a vivarium that's considered like a closed loop system. It all begins with the soil.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually read something really cool earlier just before coming on and I just like the terminology that people can use isopods as rather than cleanup crew, they were calling them custodians, like custodians of your environment. I was like, that's a really cool kind of.
Yeah, they'll eat like an animal's defecation. Even if the animal's shedding, they'll eat that as well. They actually love that because it's protein dense. And then they can also be used as a food source. So there's a variety of ways to use isopods. There's ones that are custodians, and that goes all the way up to like the high-end rubber duckies, which are considered designer isopods.
Wicked.
So, okay, my first question then, since you mentioned the designer isopods, what what specifically makes these kinds of isopods more popular or more sought after than other isopods?
And also to add to that, what is a designer isopod?
Right.
Sure. Yeah. For us, a designer isopod is something that is going to usually be very rare. It's a unique thing. A lot of these are coming from like the caves of Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam. So the fact that they're even here for them to be considered a designer isopod usually means that not many people have them. And then the breeding and the care and all that kind of stuff really goes into a designer isopod. That's where that price point comes in. You could take care of some of these, especially the higher end Cubaris species, and it might take 2 years, 2.5 years to get a colony that's large enough for you to be able to bring to market. So there's a lot of patience with this kind of stuff as well. So we got another guy popped on here.
Yep. So just quickly introduce. So everyone, this is Logan. He's only popping in for a little bit. He's another one of the hosts. He works in the background, doing some things. But I think Logan, how are you doing?
I'm actually doing pretty good. I'm at a birthday party right now, but I figured I'd jump on real quick and say what's up and see what's going on, man. I love any kind of invert, so you know me. I'm definitely interested to hear from somebody that specializes in isopods. I'm huge into bioactive work, and that's super interesting to me. So definitely take some time to say what's up.
Well, Dritz, I think a good question for that would be why does the bioactive and isopods and stuff, why is that so fascinating for you? And same to you, Bryan. Like, how is that so fascinating for you?
Well, for me, especially because I focus more on breeding. So I'm part of a group here in the U.S. The Sustainment Breeding Project. So what we're focusing on is all the endangered tarantulas that basically are on the ESA lists, and just trying to make sure that we can breed them to the best of our ability and make sure that the hobby is supplied. Because as you guys know, the United States is light years behind, the UK when it comes to tarantulas.
Should we go over to Bryan? Bryan, what were your thoughts of that, of how they support the bioactive setups, our mini ecosystems that we set up?
Yes. So let me kind of explain my background. So
Yep.
when we were first getting into stuff, building a living soil is the same thing as bioactive. We were finding ways to improve on our soil systems instead of throwing them away. I'm seeing that also in the reptiles world, where maybe somebody doesn't understand soil systems as best they should, but once they understand that it's not really up to us anymore, we're using Mother Nature, we're improving on Mother Nature. She already figured this out eons ago, so we're just finding out the best way to replicate that indoors. And it's a lot easier, obviously, on a microscopic scale when you have a soil system that is improving week after week, month after month. So when we think of like a high-end bioactive setup, that's more than just using organic matter and saying that it's organic. It has to have life, in my opinion, to be a bioactive setup, meaning that it has to have some kind of microbial life going through there. Composting worms. We like to use red wigglers, especially for the smaller setups. Isopods, the springtails. We use rove beetles to make sure that there's no issues with fungus gnats, white flies, thrips. Setting up a bioactive setup, in my opinion, is being proactive. Understanding this kind of stuff is going to improve. So we spend a little bit of money up front. And then, like Mr. Dirks was mentioning, things get easier. So a bioactive setup should be improving. And if things are improving, then you know you're headed in the right direction.
I think one of our the biggest fears within our community, let's say if we're keeping inverts such as tarantulas or reptiles, one of the biggest fears is what those inverts such as isopods. You hear horror stories which are still yet to be proven, and I suppose it's thinking about the natural biome. But for instance, someone says the isopods will eat their tarantulas, let's say, and what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that, Brian? What are your thoughts on how they might impact on the more expensive animal, let's say, that we put in there with them?
No, I think it matters what isopods you're using. So if I had like a small tarantula, my experience is using jumping spiders. If I had a ton of large Porcellio dairy cows and that there was some kind of molting issue, supposedly that is where that lore or that myth has come from, that isopods are going to eat something that is living. That's not what isopods are about. They actually love to break down decaying organic matter. So anytime that something is living, if you see an isopod on that, to this day, I've never seen that personally, but I have heard people talk about that.
Me either. Absolutely.
Yeah, and there's a gentleman that I respect. I asked him because they say that about snakes as well, and it's also a molting issue. So if the animal is having a molting issue and you're using a protein hungry isopod, there could potentially be an issue with that. But I don't think that's there's any truth to a living isopod is going to eat anything living. I've never really seen that ever happen. I mean, isopods are kind of programmed, if you will. The babies, the macae, are meant to eat the adult's poop. So from day one, they're just kind of breaking down organic matter into carbon. And carbon is the money of the microbial world. So the more money that we have, everybody's riding around living large. That's why everybody wants to work in a symbiotic relationship with each other.
Yeah.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, really, when thinking about that, because you would think, as you said, if there is an issue with the molts, there's generally an issue. Let's talk about spiders, tarantulas at the moment, just for a second. There's usually an issue with the tarantula, so it's probably not going to make it, or it's probably ceased whilst molting out. But like you said, there are ones that are after more protein, and if you've had a big explosion of isopods, it means you're keeping it really well. But it's about, we're not just caring for the tarantula, we have to care for everything else that's living in that ecosystem to make sure that there's enough source of nutrients for them. Do you think that's right, Brian, or do you think that's...
Yeah, correct. And you have to remember too, Porcellio laevis, especially the dairy cow, milkback, I mean, they're all that's all under that umbrella. They're so protein hungry that they want to eat each other. So if they're seeing some molting and there's an outbreak of this, what's really happened is the isopod breeder hasn't been feeding them enough protein so that they don't feel like they need to attack anything. They're going to, for the most part,
right there.
Yeah.
If you underfeed your isopods, they're going to look for other sources of food. Maybe your tarantula that's struggling to molt. But I feel like if you keep your isopods fed correctly and the bioactive setup is correct, they don't need to eat that. They're not fighting. Like you said, if they get hungry enough, they'll eat each other. Of course they will. But I feel like if
Well,
your setup is correct, you're good.
That's a really great segue for this next question on my mind is how many different types of isopods are there? So I know there's a lot of species, but then there's the cubaris and the like you said the dairy cows.
Porcellas, dairy cows.
Yeah, and
magic potions, all different kinds.
Are they able to be kept together? And if they do, would they hybridize?
So right next to me, I have my bearded dragon tank for my boys, and I kind of experiment there. So I'll have dairy cows, caramels, milkbacks. Those are all considered Porcellia laevis. But the reality is that for whatever reason, the version of Porcellia laevis dairy cow always outcompetes even its own technical species. So what I've seen is that if you're really trying to use isopods in a symbiotic relationship with one another, you want to use if I'm going dairy cows, I'm going to let dairy cows kind of rule the roost because they're the alpha isopod. They kind of take up all the nutrients anyway. And then I'm going to use more of a dwarf species to kind of let them be more in that soil system. So the dairy cows are going to be on top, and then the dwarf species are going to work the actual soil system, working with the composting worms, working with the springtails. Now, if I were to add some high-end cubaris, which is a huge umbrella term for all these fancy designer isopods, if you talk to the people way smarter than me that do more of the scientific names and all that, they say a lot of that might change. The cubaris is kind of too broad, I guess. But for the time being, cubaris just means high-end, usually rubber ducky-faced isopods from Thailand. And so if we were to put extremely slow breeding isopods like that with the dairy cows, they would be bullied. They would more than likely probably start to be eaten if there was enough dairy cows. So I never put any high-end species with anything other than springtails and rove beetles. I usually won't even do purple dwarfs. I'll do the white dwarfs because those are slower breeding. So slow breeding needs to go with slow breeding. High breeding can go with high breeding, especially if it's being fed to a reptile.
Wicked. Can I sort of segue off of that myself? So we're talking about, you mentioned the rubber duckies, and they're getting a lot of publicity at the moment. They're very expensive designer isopods, as we said, high end. But is there any isopod that you think is amazing that actually just gets overlooked because people are after the magic potions and all the pretty colored ones, the clown? Is there one that stands out for you that you just really like keeping, Bryan?
Well, when people ask for the rubber ducky, usually, unfortunately, those sell out, especially at shows. I mean, they're slow breeding, so I only have one or two per show. But there's something called the Pak Chung, which is a pink-faced rubber ducky. Underrated, I think, and it's something that actually is a little bit quicker to breed. So if you're thinking of rubber duckies, but you've already had success with Panda Kings, then I think going to that Pak Chung is that nice little medium. And if you get those to breed, which is pretty easy, to be honest, as long as they have cork bark and calcium and that kind of stuff, then I would go on to the rubber duckies. And that's the lure of some of those super high-end designer ones, is because there is a bit of an art to it. You need certain aspects to find success. And I will share one of the gold bars that I have learned is that the reason why I'm using composting worms and springtails is because they create something called biofilm. And that biofilm is being moved through that soil system when I'm sleeping, when I'm awake. And that biofilm cannot be bought in a store. There's no product on earth that is better than that biofilm. And you can make that for free once you start to understand how Mother Nature works.
Okay. And the biofilm feeds into that bioactive setup, I assume, and makes everything sort of thrive.
It just takes it to the next level. I mean, imagine if, again, the biofilm is kind of just that secret sauce of the microbial world. So the super microfauna, the predatory mites even, there's something called a Hypiosis miles that is extremely effective to a fungus gnat. So just making sure that everything is set up for the beneficials, allows them to kind of kick out anything that would be non-beneficial. So they don't, Mother Nature's pretty ruthless, especially down at that microscopic level. So unless, we're working together and we're being beneficial to one another, one of us is going to kick each other out of the tribe. And then, you got to go figure that out on your own. So that's something else that I think not enough people understand when it comes to isopods, that just because it's a dry, dirt, inert type thing, that doesn't mean bioactive. There's actually something alive there, and you forget to feed them. They can live off that biofilm, that bacteria, if need be. Not all of the isopods, but a lot of them, especially the ones from caves, I feel like actually benefit more from a healthier biosystem than just some dry, inert sphagnum moss.
So the biofilm that you're talking about, is that one of the layers of soil that you mentioned last week?
It would be something that's built with composting worms. You can actually kind of see it. Like if you order composting worms online, most of the time they're going to come like a light purple, and there's not going to be a sheen or a shine to it. You put them in a composting bin, you let a couple of weeks, maybe a month go by, and you will see that those composting worms actually start to turn a nice, dark, deep purple. Once they've achieved that, now when they're going through this soil system, you should think of that as kind of like the intestines of that soil system. It is the second brain, if you will. Like the stomach is the second brain of a human being. The soil system, when you're thinking of it this way, is that kind of brain. So we can take it to the next level if we want to add some plants. Plants give off what's known as exudates, the sugars of the cookies of what the microbial world wants. And then you need somebody way smarter than me to explain this kind of thing. The microbes are able to kind of dial this up as they're getting their cakes and their cookies. And so if the plant needs something, they're able to go and kind of mine that, if you will, find those minerals. So that biofilm allows that entire thing to kind of have the necessary ability to continue and thrive. There's no downtime with this. And the worms are constantly building this 24/7. So you don't even need that many worms to achieve that. And like an isopod bin that's about this big, talking maybe 10, 15 worms, and they'll self-regulate their populations as well.
With that in mind, one of our other presenters who isn't here today actually asked a really good question, and I would like to know the answer to it as well, because I've got 3 different kinds of isopods that were gifted to me recently. How often, if ever, do you actually need to do like a partial substrate change, a full substrate change, or do you not even have to at all? And then that kind of leads on to the next question: is if someone's starting, how would you say they should start?
So I see a lot of information online that is saying that you have to change out your substrates. I would imagine that is true if you're heavily feeding them and you don't have any kind of life to it, because the isopods are breaking everything down. There's nobody kind of giving back. So with the composting worms, what's coming out the rear end is always better than what they were putting in. So that's why things are constantly improving. So with a composting worm, our focus is just like how Mother Nature figured it out, is that we're using a top feed system where we're adding organic matter, we're adding leaves, we're adding wood bark to the top, and everything starts to break down over time. And so once everything is, kind of what we call alive and thriving, there's no reason to ever change out a substrate. That thing should be improving constantly. Just like out in Mother Nature, there's nobody out there churning the soil by especially a super healthy wooded area. It's just the microbial life and the fact that the trees are dropping the leaves. The leaves are kind of the real secret sauce of the microbial world. So if we're able to harness that in all of our little tubs by constantly feeding them leaves, I think people forget that. They go into all these supplements and all that. The main thing that they need in their diet is organic decomposing things, wood, that kind of stuff. The food is the breeding aspects, how to kind of take it to the next level. So if you focus on what do they need, if I'm using Cubaris, where are they found? They're in Thailand, right? So I got to make sure that they have more calcium options than maybe some of the other isopods. And that is the hard aspect of breeding isopods, is almost every single tub, every single species needs its own kind of utopia, and you're going to have to figure that out. One of the easiest ways to kind of find that median balance is to focus on bioactive, because most of them can survive or find a dry side if need be.
So they might shift from, because what I've been taught recently is you need to have a damp side and a dry side, and they can self-regulate. But from what you're saying, through this like trial and error, you'll be able to see where they sort of go, what kind of setup they need, and sort of going on from what you were saying about the substrate change. Actually, we don't need to change it; we just need to add. So adding the material to break down the natural materials. I've added some crickets, some killed crickets in there for like a bit of protein and things, and it's actually really interesting. Snake shed skin. I find my isopods love that, and
That's
they
because
definitely benefit from it.
chitin. So chitin
Yeah.
is something that not enough people talk about. That's going to come from a lot
mushrooms.
Yeah, exactly, man. I mean, mushrooms are on a whole nother level. The mycelium world works in a crazy symbiotic relationship with isopods and
Absolutely.
I've like the best way I've even heard it described once mushrooms come into a soil system is that soil system has gone from a dial-up network to then once everything is alive and thriving with the fungal aspects, it is now a fiber optic network. And I think that is a fantastic way to view it because communication is key. The same way that you can make money in this world with understanding communication technology a little bit better than the average person, the faster you build that stuff in the microbial world, it's the same thing. It's kind of weird how easy building up these soil systems can be once you just kind of remove the ego and just let Mother Nature do it. I don't need to add fish flakes because Mother Nature figured it out without fish flakes.
Right. Yeah. Mother Nature's not going around with a big blue tub of fish flakes being like, oh, we need to add some more, right?
Right. But you'll see people say that they got to replace their stuff. And in my opinion, they have to replace it because they're using too many of the fillers. With those fish flakes comes a lot of the yellow 5, yellow 6 stuff. That's going to kill a lot of the that microbial life. So the more organic you can keep it, in my opinion, I go all out. I make sure that anything that goes in there, even if I have to pay a little more, everything is food grade ingredients for what we feed them, especially when it comes to the high-end isopods. And to keep things cheap, to feed my children, I have 3 children. So when we go to Costco, we get the little shrimp. I let the children eat the shrimp part, obviously the protein, and then they give me the shells. I can crinkle up those shells, feed them to the dairy cows, and within just a few weeks, I'll have a population explosion. So there's a lot of ways to save money by feeding these isopods, especially when you're talking about the feeder type.
And by giving them, sorry, I think Leah was going to say something, but just very quickly, by giving them that protein, say the shrimp shells, that will induce a population increase of your collection. Is that?
Well, it's not just even the protein. Again, it's that chitin. So the chitin is what kind of gives them the ability to be a little bit bigger than our competition. Why are the yellow zebras a little bit brighter than the competition? Because of chitin. And you can find that in the insect frass that you're using from crickets. If I could kindly guide you into maybe even a better source, instead of using crickets, use something called black soldier fly larvae. Use that as a frass. That is kind of like the gold standard, if you will. It doesn't smell like crickets, and you're just going to find higher success, at least with isopods, if you choose to pay that. That's another example when I pay a little extra for, like even for the frass or making the food. There's just something to using that black soldier fly larvae, whether I'm farming high-end isopods. That's part of that secret sauce.
We were talking about actually, if let's think about, we've got little Johnny who's 10 years old that wants to keep isopods. What do you think, Bryan, would be the best way, or maybe the best beginner isopod for this little Johnny who's 10 to start? Because one amazing thing about the invert world is when people start keeping them, they get hooked. And like it's addictive, and I'm just wondering what you think would be a good place to start, how he would go around setting it up, getting it ready.
Yeah, we get that question a lot, actually, so much that my wife and I created like a beginner kit, and with those usually comes Porcellio scabers. So you're talking more of like the orange Dalmatians. Those are actually kind of comically almost like dairy cows, easy to get them to reproduce, get the colony to take off. So you kind of explain to somebody that's new, usually if it's a child, you got to make sure that this is watered. That's the main thing. You go out of town, you forget them. A week in an isopod's life is a long time. So kind of focusing on somebody realizing that, if they go out of town for 2 weeks and they didn't water before they left, that's why, their isopods are all dead. And so I would start out with something very basic. Dritz mentioned like the powder orange, powder blue. That's another one where you could probably leave for 2 weeks and they would still be okay. So a little bit of education from the isopods goes a long way when you're starting out. A lot of people that are more, they don't want something, they want something that's maybe a little more of a collector, is called the Panda King. That's a Cubaris. That's considered like a lower end designer isopod. And that breeds so fast that children find success with that one as well. So it looks like a rubber
really
ducky.
Beautiful one to look at as well, the Panda Kings, aren't they?
Yeah, man. And I think that one, maybe going back to, that's another one that's maybe underrated because it looks fairly like a rubber ducky. The price point is a lot cheaper than a rubber ducky. And it breeds so quick that most people, again, unless they forget the water, find success with that variety.
No, and we were talking earlier, weren't we, about like keeping it so there's like a little ecosystem. So keeping one end like quite moist, maybe for myself, I actually go out and get moss from the local woods, like away from the roads, things like that, and it's got a little bit of a bioactive in it already, a bit of the ecosystem, and I keep that end really moist, and then there's more of a dry side with bits of cork bark on the other end, and sort of doing that. So, but they're really easy to look after, right? that's what a brilliant thing is. Sorry, Bryan.
Yeah, if they're not highly like the price point isn't high or they're rare, then yes, they're usually pretty easy to take care of. When you're talking about like a white rubber ducky or something like that, even red pack chungs at first, there's just a lot of nuances to it, a little bit of skill. But at the end of the day, if you focus on organic matter and a healthy soil substrate, you're going to find success with most isopods, including the high-end ones.
Yeah.
So, talking about beginning things, like in, kind of beginner stuff, I was actually curious as to what inspired your superfood that you made for the isopods.
Yeah.
You have a superfood that is just fabulous.
It comes from failure, like I had mentioned, we especially at the beginning, we thought that this was a lot easier than it was. So we bought these Thailand spikies, and we spent a significant amount of money, a comical amount of money on these things because we bought a bunch of them. And we were using some of the more, on the internet, what kind of food sources to use and that kind of stuff. And I noticed over time that these things were getting like sluggish and not as healthy, and a lot of like weird, not healthy fungus, like we had mentioned. But like when you're seeing mold and that kind of stuff from food, that's bad. If you're seeing mold and fungus from wood, that's good. So remember that kind of stuff. But when it was coming from that food source, now all of a sudden I had thrips and whiteflies. These things are vectors for disease. And it seemed like it wiped out the entire colony because I was using this kind of cheaper food source. You could even add some water and it turns into a gelatin. Especially when you're spending the money for high-end stuff, again, I think the money is well spent when you're using food-grade things, stuff that the isopod can kind of recognize as food already. There's not a filler. There's not some kind of gelatin making it fancy or whatever. So keeping it simple is extremely important for what you're getting at, Leah, is that the food sources that we have like, 3 different varieties of calcium, one of them even being coral calcium, which is extremely expensive. But because that coral is part of kind of that crustacean ecosystem, it seems like they go for that. We also spend money on freeze dried, so we don't just have a filler with a vegetable. It's actually freeze dried, so it has the nutrients. I think that's also something that goes a long way, where we're not trying to cut corners like some of the other, and these are more like the big box, big brands. I'm not trying to like, they're just not what you would want them to be if you're looking to breed the high-end isopods. If you're just feeding that stuff to the dairy cows, it works great. But again, you're opening yourself up to a lot of vectors and whiteflies. thrips, fungus gnats. Those things are horrific if you've never experienced that before and it gets out of control. It's going to be hard to manage that.
What was the name of the beetle you said you used to control fungus gnats again? Because I'm interested in that. I've got some carnivorous plants which I keep in with my invertebrates. Well, not in, but by the side in pots. But what are the beetles that you use to?
Yeah, it's called a rove beetle, ROVE, and that is a tried and true thing. But you need usually things have to work in a symbiotic relationship.
Like the system.
So if the rove beetles are eating the adults, well, who's eating the baby larvae? Well, the rove beetles are a little bit, but at the same time, we can use something called a Hypiosis miles, or that's a predatory mite that, again, is tried and true that will actually go out and seek the fungus gnat larvae. So that's another way where you can combat Mother Nature by just kind of understanding how Mother Nature works. And then there's a carnivorous plant. You might have been the monkey, they're called monkey cubs or pitcher plants.
Yeah.
Those are fantastic for also capturing a lot of the fungus gnats if things have gotten out of control. It's a better investment, in my opinion, than buying the yellow and the blue sticky traps because the plant is benefiting from that infestation.
And the plant, like you said, is then feeding into the soil for like the whole ecosystem. So it's very circular, isn't it? So it's all entwined. It sounds.
Yeah, you can even use like they're called sundews for ones that would grow in the soil, and then the pitcher plants usually you hang up. They're usually like a hanging plant, and those are going to be way more effective than spending money on the yellow sticky traps.
Yeah, I've got the sundews, and one of my friends actually grows and sells pitcher plants. He's got 4 greenhouses, and he's made his own hybrids and stuff, and they're fascinating. Absolutely beautiful plants. How long have you been keeping and supplying the community with inverts, with isopods?
Good question.
So how do we get, how was I able to get more people to care about what we are doing farming cannabis than all the other people out there that are also doing it? And for us, it was showing the microbial world. Like, all right, I started to see that people had an interest in isopods. And I then moved to Oklahoma. I was doing some cannabis consulting. That didn't work out for me. And then COVID happened. So I was sitting at the dinner table with my wife, and I was trying to explain to her that I think people would buy isopods. And she kind of dismissed the whole thing at first. So I went back to the drawing board and I researched, all right, what are some isopods that people collect? And that's when I discovered the Rubber Ducky Isopod.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard of that before. I just knew about like the zebras and just a couple other ones. And then once I saw the Rubber Ducky, I don't know, man. From that point on, I was like, all right, I think this is going to be a thing. And then I found the domain name. Nobody had even had the domain name. And I thought that was kind of like if I was going to sell tissues, nobody had Kleenex yet.
Yeah.
So I'm very fortunate and grateful for that. And since then, just kind of on the grind of building a brand. And I'm now just using that to get the isopods to be a little bit prettier than the competition.
Super cool.
That is so cool, isn't it? Yeah. I'm going to finish off with one last question, if that's okay. And do you keep any other inverts other than isopods? Has it opened a gateway to other things for you, or is it just isopods?
We're just on isopods and springtails. And I think the reason for that is, my wife and I's goal is to be known as like the bioactive isopod company. And to achieve a goal that lofty, we have to just maintain and kind of stay in our lane. I think a lot of people like that too when we go to the reptile places and they realize, hey, we're not going to be selling snakes as well. We're not trying to take. We're just trying to do the best little isopod, family-owned business that we can. And for us, it's going to be eventually having hundreds of different species that we've been able to bring to market.
Yeah, and I think that's really commendable as well. Like if you're focusing on one thing, that means you haven't got praying mantis taking your attention, millipedes, tarantulas, all that. You can focus all of your attention and energy on that. And I think when you're selling, it shows people are going to see that as well, aren't they? They see that you have that understanding. So we're now at the end of the podcast. We're cutting a little bit short because I've got something to run off to in a minute. But Bryan, is there anything you would like to plug anything you guys are doing, anything coming up?
Yeah, well, we're always going to the shows if it's within like a day or two of a drive. We're there. That's how I've met Leah, probably 6 or 7 times now, as she's at the shows just as much as I am. And each and every week on Wednesdays, I have a show where we talk about the soil stuff. It's on the Future Cannabis Project. That is like a community platform. So we kind of interview some of the best and brightest. If you want to go back, we've interviewed Jeff Lowenfels, Dr. Laningham. I mean, there's just a lot of bright-minded people on that. And catch us on Instagram at Rubber Ducky Isopods, our website, rubberduckyisopods.com. We're adding a lot of stuff to the website. I literally just bought 28 species yesterday, so we're excited to bring some of those to market as well. Just always working behind the scenes, and I hope more people realize that bioactive, if you're really breaking it down, means easier for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there was also something else you're doing, especially for a month. Was it for the podcast listeners?
Yeah, we're using a 25% off code. When most people come to me, they're just saying like, "Hey, can you do 10% or something like that?" And to be honest, I don't. If I'm gonna give a coupon code, I like to make it where you guys feel like I'm actually giving you something. So I'm making it for 25% off. If you guys are familiar with Rubber Ducky Isopods, we're pretty, we don't haggle. Leah can attest to that. Like when we're at the shows, it's not, this is the price. So when we do offer this kind of stuff, I hope that you guys see that it is a gift. We only even do half off for Cyber Monday once a year. So these are going to be some of the lowest prices of the year. So 25% off for InvertiCast, 25.
Yeah,
so that
we'll link everything down in the comments as well. But thank you so much for doing that, Bryan, for us, and thank you so much for joining us. Like I said, Logan, just wait for that to go live, and then you'll be able to buy some isopods. But
I'm gonna definitely reach out to Bryan. I got like 25 questions we can't fit in this session here, so I'll be hitting you up, my friend. Very cool.
Absolutely.
I do the same. I spend a lot of time at his booth because he's so smart. I love listening to this, and I love understanding the bioactive. It's amazing.
Logan,
I'm sorry about that.
as you are talking, Logan, is there anything that you yourself that you wanted to promote? Maybe what your your Facebook, your Tarantula stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really just trying to promote anything other than just the relationship of this community that we're all involved in. I don't actually per se. I do my own business. I sell tarantulas. I do the whole thing. I go to shows. My brother runs the southern shows in Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, and all that. And I do the East Coast, and we tag team. He does snakes and reptiles, and I do inverts. Never really did isopods other than for the bioactive stuff that I'm working on and all that stuff. But it's a very bright future for this because honestly, even though this has been going on for a long time, it's one of those things like we are actually the pioneers of what's going on right now because there's so much that we don't understand, and Bryan, hey, you got him, you got it. Cool. Good stuff, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Cheers, Logan. And Leah, have you got anything you would like to promote today? Thank you for hosting most of today.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, Rubber Ducky Isopods. I have always been super happy with what I have purchased from them. They, Bryan and Natassa, they have also given me, some Panda King isopods that are doing really well now. I've had them for a little over a year, and they're thriving, and it's fantastic and just awesome. And I have a really great rehousing video this week. It's actually going to be kind of scary.
Cool. Do you want to, what tarantula is it?
It's the Cereopagus lividum. So
okay,
yeah, it was quite a spicy girl.
Cool.
That's
brilliant.
That's a fun species to work with.
Yeah, definitely.
Keep you on your toes.
I really hope that we're going to see Rubber Ducky start subscribing to all of our channels. Just putting out there, Bryan, you know. And so for my shameless plug, thank you everyone for joining InvertiCast. First of all, we've moved channels, so please subscribe if you're not already subscribed to the channel. I am Nat, so I'm from Somerset Spiders, and we, I suppose it is with we, because I've got a voiceover guy. We have got a collaboration video that is starting at 8 o'clock on Mr. Grindler's Creatures channel. So that is in
I've seen him before, yeah.
Yeah, so that is in 3 minutes. And then the second part of the video will be on the Somerset Spiders channel. So it'll be really nice to see you guys there.
Cool.
Thank you so much, everyone, for the show. Bryan, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you very much, guys. Take it easy.